Let's start building server-side applications. First of all, we ask you in the tutorial to download this tool called Postman. It's just a tool to help with building APIs and building server-side, building APIs mostly. So we can test it, for example, with the GitHub API. If I tell it to do get and the URL, then it will do the call, and I can see that we get back a response, which is an array of objects, and each object has all the information that we want about the repo. So it makes it easy to test APIs, especially that if you do it in a browser, basically in the browser by default it will do the GET request, but it might be a bit harder to do a post or other HTTP verbs there, unless you build a form and so on. So it's easier to use Postman to test APIs, which brings us to actually what's an API. So an API, formally, it stands for Application Programming Interface. You can think of it as an interface. There is a service that's providing some information in the context of what we are doing. It is a web because we're doing web development, so it's a web interface. You will hear also web service, and we're using always HTTP. Interfaces in programming, APIs can be other thing, an API to talk to a hard disk, to do something with hardware. In all cases, it's like an agreement between someone providing a service and someone who wants to use that service, that you have to use it in a certain way. In this agreement here, we're told that if you want to get the repos of a user, you have to call a URL. URL use a uniform resource locator, and resource is an important word here. The resource that we're getting is repos, and our agreement with GitHub that we call this URL with the username here, and they will give us the data in an array of objects that has ID, name, full name, whatever. So it's an agreement between the two of us. There is an analogy in the description that we have in the workshop that says it's like a menu in a restaurant. So if you are provided a menu and then you see an item that you want, you ask for it, the waiter will go to the chef or to the kitchen, and you will get what you want. You don't care what's happening in the kitchen. You just have this agreement that the menu, there is an item that you ask for and you will get it. There is a slight difference with APIs and web APIs that you can also, in a way, not just get, you can also create. So imagine if you can give even the ingredients, some of the ingredients to the waiter, and then you will get back a dish, basically. But at the end, it's an interface. It's a interface to communicate between two parties. In this case, is the client and the server. And in what we are doing, it's all web, because we're doing web development. So we use the protocol for web, which is HTTP. You will also use here the word REST. We'll get back to that again, but it's a style of building these APIs in a way that people can understand what it does. Mainly, the main thing about this style that you have resources and you use HTTP verbs, get, post, put, and so on in a certain way. Typically get for getting, post for creating, and put for updating, and delete for deleting. So now, enough with the theory. We know what's an API, more or less. Let's start building one. You should have forked the repo from GitHub, the workshop, the API workshop. It's empty. It just has a git ignore file. The git ignore tells it to ignore certain files or folders when we commit and push. in this case it's just ignoring the node modules, and we'll see what that has, the node modules. So the first thing that we will do is that we will initialize the project. We use a command, the npm init, and npm is node package manager, which is a tool that we will use a lot to install packages. And packages are libraries that people build to provide certain functionality. When you say npm init, you will be asked with a few questions. Just change the entry point to server.js, and the rest you can just press enter and leave it as it is. Yes. And that will create a package JSON file. If you look at the package JSON file, it's this JSON file, and okay, so this the package JSON that you saw a few seconds ago is wrong. It should be empty like this, so ignore that. This is when you say npm init, is what you will get a package JSON file with the stuff that we defined when we were pressing OK and so on. So what we'll do next is that we can use then npm again to install some dependencies, some packages that we will use. So the same way that we're using React as a dependency, someone else built React and we used it to build front-end application, and we will use a framework in Node called Express that we will use to build APIs. So the way we install a dependency, we say npm install express, and we will add -- save, which tells it to install it, and it will save it in the dependencies in package JSON. What this does basically is that instead, because if I look at the files, you'll see that there is a node modules folder. If I look inside it, there will be the dependencies that just got installed. A lot of them actually with Express, and the dependencies of Express as well. But when you want to share your application with someone else, you don't need to ship the whole node modules with them. So that's why we add node modules to the git ignore. We just give them the package JSON. It's like a manifest. It's tells it that you need Express library and this version of it. So when they get it on the other side, if you clone someone's repo, all you need to say is npm install, just install without the name of the library, and that will install whatever is defined in the package JSON. We've done that a lot, and people were confused about when you say npm install, when you say npm install React, and when you say npm install, it just goes and installs whatever is defined in your package JSON. When I tell it npm install a library, then it installs that specific library. If I tell it npm install the library and then -- save, then that installs it and also adds it to package JSON. So now we have Express installed, and we should start building the server. I will create a new file, say it's a server.js, and the first thing that we need is to require that library we just installed, Express. So say require Express, and that now we have we got hold of Express from node modules, from our modules that we create, we installed, and you say create a new app with Express. This is the way Express works. And then the next bit is to start listening. The server listens to requests, so we can just say app.listen, and this here is the port number. So we said when you call a URL, there is different part. You're calling a server, there is a resource, and there is also a port number. So the port number in this case is 3000. And now if we want to run the server, we can just say node server.js, and this you see is say server is listening on port 3000, ready to accept requests. We will create a shortcut for that in package.json. So you can see here inside script, you can say start, and that can be an alias to serve node server.js. So instead of saying node server.js every time, I can just say npm start, and that will run node server.js or whatever we define, and it will run our code. So now we have a server listening, waiting for requests. So we should be able to send requests and expect responses. The way we start doing that is with handler functions. So whenever a request reaches the server, we need a way to respond to it. That way is a handler function. And the way we'll do that is that we say, we created that app with Express. So Express, we're using Express because it makes things easier, the same way that React should have made things easier for front end. So the way you say it is just the app that we created, we say app.get. Get is the verb, that HTTP verb that we'll use. So if we wanted to handle a post request, we'll say app.post. If it's a put, it will be app.put, but in this case it's just get. And then we tell it what is the endpoint name. In this case, I'll just say slash, and then give it a function to respond to, and that function takes two parameters, a request and a response. And you can use request to get things that were sent in the request from the client, and response to manipulate the response that will send back. So the easiest thing that you can say here, res.send hello world. This is telling it to send the response, and that's it. I'll have to close my server and restart it. So I'll just say Control C and then npm start again. And now if I go to localhost 3000, so this is, we have the verb is get, we have the protocol is HTTP, localhost is the domain that we are calling, and then or the host, and then the port number is 3000, and then the endpoint or the resource path, which is in this case is just slash, and we get back hello world as a response from the server. So this here is a URL, a uniform resource locator, a way that's everything in the internet that you go to is defined in that way. You have HTTP or HTTPS as a protocol. You have a domain or a host like www.google.com, and there is actually a port as well. It's just that by default, if it's port 80, you don't need to write it, but there is also a port. And then after that is the bit that comes here is the resource path or the endpoint. So when you say slash, when we say slash, then we're asking for the resource slash. That's why we're handling that one. If we say slash CYF, then the resource where it's giving us, in this case, a 404, which is a different response. That means not found, because there is no resource called, there is no endpoint called slash CYF. When we put that, we got a 200 as a status code. So there are lots of things happening here. There is all the bits and pieces of HTTP are very obvious for us. There is the verb, there is the URL with all its bits and pieces, and there is a request, that's the top bit of Postman, and there is a response, which is what we get here in the bottom. And when you click send, we're basically sending a request and expecting a response, and response has a status in this case is 200, which means it's okay. When we did something other than that, slash CYF, then we get a different response, which is 404, which is not found. These are the main bits about building APIs, and yeah, we here when we define how to the handlers, we just care about the resource path, the bit after the host and the port number. So slash, if we want to respond to slash CYF, will be slash CYF. It's not HTTP localhost CIF, because that bit is it's the same. We know we are running in this server. It can be run on localhost on our machine, but also it can be on a remote server. It's the same. It will take a REST response, and then we can send back res.send see code your future, and then if I kill the server, Control C and run it again, and go to Postman, and this time if I go get CYF, then I'll get back code your future. If I try to do a post to CYF, then I'll get 404 because we didn't define a post, we only defined a get when we say here .get. So if we recap what we did so far, we created a new project. We say npm init to get a package JSON. We installed with npm install --save a library called Express, and the way we use it is const express. We require it first. We create an app of it, and then we define. And then, well, first we listen. Just this bit is to just start the server, and we give it handlers to respond to different requests. The handlers are callback functions. Let's also get used to using array methods and ES6 syntax in general, but this is the same as before. We get a request and a response, and it's convention that they call rec and res, but these are just it could have been called anything. It's just a variable, whatever it's called here. So with res, we can say res.send and then something. When we send back a response if the client requests this specific endpoint. And that's what we have so far.